Welcome to the 30th episode of the It's Been Said podcast. I'm your host, SAI Executive Director Lisa Remy. Each show is dedicated to conversations on leadership as we further SAI's mission to support, encourage, and develop Iowa's educational leaders and learners. I'm excited to welcome Mr. Josh Ain, Superintendent of Olwein Community School District. Josh serves on our SAI Representative Council and has his referee certification as well. Josh has been active in reaching out to the boards of control to bring to light the negative effects a classification system can have on the competitive nature of sports. So welcome, Josh, and thank you so much for giving of your precious little time that there is to be on our podcast.
Awesome. Lisa, I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me as well. So first start by sharing a little bit about yourself and then why you're interested in the athletic classification system.
Sure. So I grew up in Conrad, BCLAW High School, graduated from there. Both my parents were educators and coaches of like many sports. So I grew up very close to competitive athletics and education. Became a teacher, coach myself, and then school principal. I served that role for 5 years, and then as school superintendent, is finishing my 8th year in Olwein. Um, so that's kind of just real quick resume. I got interested in this topic um, when I was at Melcher Dallas, actually as a principal. And Melcher is, if you're not familiar, rural Marion County. We had a student population, K-12, like 350 some odd kids, and just saw the impacts of rural poverty on competitive sport. Now, we were competitive in a lot of things there, but also struggled to even put teams together in other areas. And then coming to Olwine, um, that is historically faced rural poverty challenges. The impacts were much greater, and so my eyes were opened when I was in Melcher, and then definitely saw the impacts here. And I guess just not wanting to sit by and do nothing, I think is kind of what got me interested and then active. So that's where what does that activity look like? Just asking questions of our leaders and of our association and our union around why do we classify competitive sport the way we do. And it's also, if you don't know, I mean, we use classification not just in sports, but also in competitive music, band, and in other areas. And so, state cheerleading competition has classification groups. So it bleeds into other areas. It's not just on the football field, so to speak. So that's what kind of drives me and puts energy behind this work.
Yeah, well, thanks for your explanation there and also making sure that we understand it really is more than just athletics. It's the activity side of the organizations as well or of schools. So it does have an impact on kids and yeah, I'm just looking forward to our conversation today. So let's start first by helping our listeners understand like what is the current system, right? So what's the current system of classifying maybe athletic or activity programs in Iowa?
Sure. So the current system in pretty much every area that classifies students does it by beds enrollment. And so that's your student count taken at a specific time of year, and then you're classified into just subgroups based off of that number. The subgroups are determined by leadership committees that determine what those cutoffs should be. So largest schools typically, or in the past, were your biggest 48 um, buildings. And then, the next group was typically 64. and then 64 again or 96. That they just kind of created um, subgroups of breakdowns. The justification of how those came to be and then evolved that way were built on a premise that um, the total number of students in a district or building uh, would limit access to particular activities. So, say a big school like Valley West Des Moines, one of the largest buildings in the state. Uh, they have, over 1,000 students, like 1,700 maybe. You probably know the answer to that. But that's a lot of kids. And so, you could only put 5 kids on a basketball floor. And so justifying that there's less large schools in the top because there are more kids, therefore the opportunities are less, if that makes sense. And so, if you go to a small building, small district, and maybe there's only 76 kids in your high school, it takes like the entire high school to fill out volleyball, football, basketball team, and therefore everybody gets an opportunity. So it's kind of justified that way from a numbers sense, and that was kind of how it evolved. Um, so 1950s, 1960s, it really started to evolve. There used to be like 1,000 high schools across the state of Iowa, and really participated in sports in relatively small number. Most schools had a track team of some kind, and then basketball evolved, and then football in the 70s is when we really started to see classification come around. From a safety standpoint, they needed to start subdividing these schools uh, by size. So, the original Class A and then Class AA is how it came. And there was AAA, and then they just, started going to 3A, 4A, etc. Is how the
Mhm.
classification system evolved there. So basically, real quick, current status. Wrestling has 3 classifications. Our other major sports, baseball, softball, and on the boys, I'm sorry, baseball, football, track on the boys' side has 4. The girls have 5, and then football has 5, sorry, 6 plus 8-man. And 8-man is getting large enough where I think a person could justify even classifying 8-man into 2 classes. Um, so that would make an additional class for football. Or, and in that process, maybe Class A goes away. At least that's kind of some of the chatter that I've heard. So
Mhm.
um, that's kind of the breakdown of kind of how classification works now. It's basically, how you are size wise. Two
Yeah.
two real quick problems that are just top of mind from
Mhm.
that simply is that in our current system, if you share a program, you take the beds from both schools, and you may not get access to all the kids in both of the schools, which is problematic from a classification lens. Uh, and then the other problem is that in our current system, if I would open a charter school or a private school for that matter, and I only allowed boys in my school or girls for that matter, the classification system does not account for that. So my entire student population could be of one gender, and our current classification system just basically doesn't have a solution for that. Not that we have that as a significant problem, but it's definitely something that we should be thinking about and talking about when we classify our students for competitive athletics.
Yeah. So, Josh, the demographics in Iowa have changed, right, across the state, and probably more so in some regions than others. So I'm just curious, does our current classification system take into account any factors like the socioeconomic status and that increasing free and reduced lunch population that I've seen and I hear about in districts across our state?
Currently football does. So in 2023, actually the battle was kind of in 2022. We fought hard to get a poverty kind of exemption into the football classification, and it made it through. It had to go to the Iowa school board for final approval, and we were able to get that. And then the districting that the Athletic Association does for football had a poverty impact on the classification, and probably I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I think about 20 schools across all classifications were impacted in terms of moving up a class or potentially down a class. So that's less than 10% of schools were specifically impacted by classification in terms of movement. But I do think it was the very first time that our state has kind of done anything of significance to at least indicate that poverty and a socioeconomic status of a school plays a role in its competitiveness in terms of putting together a competitive team to put on the field. Uh, illustrating that point that the demographics of Iowa have changed, let me throw two numbers at you here real quick.
Mhm.
Um, so in 2001, that's the year I graduated high school, the average free and reduced lunch rate in Iowa schools was 26%. And the important number on that is the standard deviation of that poverty rate was 9.9. Okay.
Okay.
This year, well, in 2024, the most recent numbers we have from the state, the average free and reduced lunch rate for schools in Iowa was 41%. Okay, so it's grown from 26% to 41%. I think that's significant.
It
But
is.
what's more significant is the standard deviation is now 18. So we doubled the standard deviation. So not only have we gotten poorer, we have more poverty in our mostly our rural school districts, but the gap has grown. So it's accelerating. And I think that's the alarming issue here, is that we're not going the other way. It's going to continue to get worse. And not to, I don't want to sound alarmist or like, Chicken Little, like the sky is falling, but we're definitely not going the other way. And I think that we are really seeing the impacts of that on student participation. Um, you saw, I mean, we were impacted here in Olwein. We had to cancel varsity football games in a two-way school district because we didn't have enough kids to field a football team. We've seen it in other high poverty areas. And I know Perry faced an issue a couple of years ago and got kind of very public about this. We've seen girls basketball programs shuttering their doors. We've had girls softball programs shuttering their doors. Um, is anybody asking why? And is the why, we assume kids are different now. They're lazy. They don't want to work hard. Maybe, I mean, maybe, but also there probably is something else to it and something else going on. If you're a student that is in a high poverty area or just a rural area, you don't have access to club sports like you would in a metro area,
Mhm.
and you're going to try girls basketball when you're a seventh grader for the very first time, you're going to get throttled in a girls basketball game, playing teams that are more competitive because they've been more involved, they have more access, they have more resources potentially if you're in a more metro area or a more affluent area. And then what? I mean, do you keep grinding and facing that adversity? Truth of the matter is, you probably walk away from the sport before you even get started. And I think that is the persistent issue that we are up against when it comes to these participation numbers and these programs that we're losing simply because we've lost a competitive advantage. I shouldn't say competitive advantage. We've lost a competitive edge in terms of um, the spirit of competition, the spirit of sportsmanship should be when I walk on the court or I step on the floor, I should feel reasonably comfortable that the team I'm competing against, that I have a chance to compete
Mhm.
safely and that there is an outside chance that I could win the game, right? Or that I think I should be able to at least if I do the right things within the rules of the game. Um, if you were to give some like, if you put a 1A school district up against a 4A school district, I think most general public would say, well, that's asinine. And, why would you do that? There clearly is a disadvantage there. Well, that disadvantage also plays itself out with a higher impact than I think people realize in a school district that is less advantaged versus a school district that is more advantaged in terms of its free and reduced lunch rate and population.
Mhm. Josh, kind of going off some of my questions, but as I've been, paying attention to whether it's in the news, whether it's on TV news or written or just hearing it through, our members and so forth, have heard and seen some school districts that are looking to change their from their current conference to another conference. And I'm curious from your perspective if you think some of that is related to the topic that we're talking about now, that competitiveness. When you said, that you should have a reasonable idea that you're going to be competitive when you step on the court or on the softball field or whatever it is. Do you think that's part of the reason why they're looking to, in some cases, looking to change conferences?
100%, it's a part of the equation. Um, so Olwein and myself were very I say in the mix. We're in the middle. We were members of the Northeast Iowa Conference for over 100 years, and we recently moved to the NICL. And the primary driver of that discussion decision was competitiveness. Were there other factors at play? Travel, just being more alike or less alike than your conference schools in terms of, demographics, some of the other sports offered, et cetera. Those absolutely. But
Mhm.
I'd be remiss to say that it wasn't the most and the primary decision was um, for that reason. Let me give you a quick example of that. When we were studying that decision to switch conferences, um, our conference, the NEIC at the time, had an all sports trophy that they awarded to a point system of the school district that fielded the most athletic wins across all sports, whatever. And then they published the rankings of those, the outcomes, so to speak, for that. Um, so we finished last as a district in that total for over a decade in a row. Um, and we went 7 years without winning a conference bad boys basketball game. Um, so yeah, I mean it was very, very real. And I think I was a college athlete. I was a head football coach. I coached junior high basketball. I coached track. I coached baseball. Um, I had a pretty good feeling of what it took to be competitive, to win, and what it looked like. And what's crazy is that I'd go to practice, I'd watch ball games, and what I saw with my eyes was all the right stuff. I mean, I saw our coaches doing all the right stuff. We had all the right facilities. We had all the right investment in our kids. We had all the right kids showing up and doing the right things, but we weren't getting wins. And it's not necessarily about getting wins. Okay. And I don't want to like overplay that.
Mhm.
Our kids were feeling defeated because they were doing all the things that they're supposed to be doing. And I was watching that. They were doing all the things that they were supposed to be doing, but it wasn't fruitful. And then they started to lose hope. And there was like this culture, and then they were seeing this um, environment of why should I show up if I don't have a chance to win the game? And then you're getting beat by 60 points in a basketball game, and you're just getting throttled in all these different sports. Why continue doing that? And I think the collective mindset of school leaders, when it comes to making decisions that are best for their own districts and their own kids, is to start or look at, changing conferences, or they're trying to solve the issue that does need to be addressed and needs to be solved at a state level, and they're doing it on their own. And what you're seeing right now across the state is a little bit of dysfunction around this conference realignment, to the point where I believe that legislation has been drafted to try to solve some of these problems. Interesting that we want local control in the state of Iowa. It's something we pride ourselves on. And we have state legislation being proposed to regulate our conferences in terms of how they get in and out of how we get in and out of conferences. There's a state law that says schools should be in a conference. Totally agree with that. But the problem that we need to address that's not being addressed is how we classify schools. And I think what we're seeing in all these areas that I've mentioned is our refusal to deal with this issue. And um, the problems that we are seeing are really all fundamentally because of this environment that we've created, where we have kids that should not be playing against other kids just because of, the competitive advantage that one area has over another.
Yeah, so I hear you saying you feel strongly that Iowa should consider, right, changing how they classify. So what ideas, what suggestions might you have for changing? Now, you mentioned that there was a slight change at the football level, but not at other um, sports yet. So I'm just curious, what ideas do you have for that?
So the idea that or that was generated and talked about with football is kind of having um like a it's probably similar to your handicap in golf, where you're given kind of a rating based on your poverty rating, and then you lose, or those students are a percentage of your beds count is reduced, or comes off of your classification. Uh, the good thing about a system like that is that it can be fine-tuned. I don't know that there's been any talk about adjusting it for this next cycle of football districts, which will be coming out this spring. Um, but it could be. If you have a dial, so to speak, and you can make adjustments to the impact you want that number to have on your total outcome. So I earlier mentioned, around 20 or less than 10% of our districts were impacted. If we'd want to see that number be higher, you could turn that dial up. You could, change that weighting, so to speak, to get a desired outcome that you want. So the easiest next action for any of our sports, or either of our two organizations, would be to apply that to all sports. In speaking with leadership on the girls' side, I was told, I guess, that they see it only as a football problem because of safety, and that they made an attempt to spread things out by going from 4 classes to 5 several years ago, and that was the solution, at least at the time. And I argue that you're just taking, like like bread or bread dough, and you're just making it further away. You're just spreading it out. You're not actually solving the problem, going 4 classes to 5. It is a solution because you at least provide more avenues for success in a 5 class system versus a 4 class system. But you're not actually solving any of the real issues. Um, so I would go with some type of thing like that. The other, probably I would say more innovative or um, probably challenging sell, would be to look at an opt-in system. So just simply thinking about this, if you had um, 3 groups of schools, small, medium, and large, and then within each of those groupings, you basically had an A or a B. A being kind of your premier, B being your, just looking to be competitive group. Um, you end up with 6 classes, which is just one more than the girls have.
Mhm.
And I would argue that basically you can you create who gets into the A group, the premier group. It's anybody that's had success in their program in the last 2 years, and then anybody with a free reduced lunch population under the state average or at a certain cut score. They're automatically in that top tier. And then anybody in the lower group that wants to be in the A group because their football team's good and they want to be competitive and they want to whatever, they want to be in that premier group, let them, right? So if that makes that group go from 47 to 50 because we have two groups that want 2 or 3 teams that want to push up, and then we have, the top tier has 50 and the bottom has 43, great. But there is some choice in terms of which one you kind of want to be in. And I think that would go further to allow teams to kind of, field competitive teams and to be in classifications that are more alike.
Mhm.
Um, the last thing I know that everybody's favorite legal guru, Mr. Carver, has kind of thrown some things out in the past couple of years. He suggested having a committee that would be allowed to kind of review the cases and appeals from some of these numbers, right? So we want to create this equity or this system based on numbers, and sometimes the numbers don't produce the outcomes we want, or an outcome that maybe would be perceived as harmful. And I think his argument is, he's got a good argument that we'll put a committee together that can review those things if anybody wants to appeal it, and then they just make the final call on it. And then at least there's a due process component to if you're not happy with the result of where the classification system puts you.
We're pausing for a brief commercial break. We'll be right back to continue our conversation. Stick around. SAI is excited to connect with you on Facebook. We just launched our official page. Follow us online at SAI Iowa. We love to post positive stories about your school and district leaders. Please like and share our posts and tag us on your own so we can help share more positive stories.
Hi, I'm Matt Carver, Legal Services Director at SAI. One of the benefits you receive as a member of SAI is to have a privileged conversation with me about your pressing legal issues. While I don't replace your district's legal counsel, I do my best to provide friendly and practical advice for you as a member. If you are a member, simply call the SAI office at 515-267-1115 and ask for Matt. If you aren't a current member, join or renew today at www.sai-iowa.org.
And now, back to our conversation on leadership.
Josh, are you, with the suggestions that you just shared, are these models that you've seen successful in any other states, or are there others that you've seen that maybe Iowa should consider?
There are a lot of states that have different models. Pennsylvania has a poverty and a success criteria. Each team or school are given a certain amount of points, And then those points are redone every single year, and then the classifications are published every single year. I am not currently aware if there's any opt-in system other than like the NCAA. So the NCAA has Division One, two, and three, and they have different parameters on who can be a Division Two, Division Three, Division One school. But primarily the school gets to kind of select its own, environment. You have a school like Duke plays Division One football, basketball, and they have a student population of like 4,000. And they're playing against school like Ohio State that has a student population of whatever they are at 70,000 or something, just insane. Um, so, I think that at least, and nobody's feeling sorry for Duke and nobody feels sorry for Ohio State because they're choosing their own avenue. And I don't know that anybody's looking to have anybody feeling sorry for them. I just think that there is some choice that would be beneficial to our student athletes if the district got to self-select kind of where they want their kids participating.
Mhm. How do you think parents or even student athletes, either what is their current perception, right, of the success and the impact currently of the classification system, or maybe it's an and or what would you think you might hear from them if you moved into more of a opt-in?
I don't think the families and or students have really any idea of how any of this works. Um, they see the results on game day and they're not happy with it, or they are happy with it. They're happy with their continued success. The system benefits them, and they don't want to see it changed, or the system's not benefiting them, but they have no idea how the system really works, or how to change it so that it could benefit them or benefit them in a different way. So I think that's my guess at the perception of how they would potentially approach this.
Mhm.
I think if you asked any football parent how football teams are classified before or after the change in 2023, and they would just either roll their eyes or shrug their shoulders that they would have no idea of how it's calculated or why their team is 2A, 3A, or 4A.
Yeah, yeah, you're probably right there. So there's been conversation around this topic in Iowa, and obviously a slight change with football. What arguments have you heard or are you continuing to hear against a continued conversation around this or even further change in the classification system?
Um, so I'll give you some pushback that I've heard. Won't name names. So one is that not our problem. This is a football problem. Some pushback is that there will be lawsuits, primarily from the parochial schools. That's I've heard, and that um, came from a prominent voice. There was pushback um, from, I think, just understanding of or fear of what a new system would look like. Uh, any kind of solution to this typically is more complicated than just creating cut scores that everybody can see and understand. And so
Mhm.
something new typically has to be more complicated, and complicated solutions, I think, just cause some general fear because we don't know what it's going to look like or how it's going to play out. And then I think the last one that I probably hear the most in these conversations is that kids just need to work harder or pull themselves up by their bootstraps. That if they want to compete with these other schools that are continually winning and continually having great deals of success, then um, that your community or your school or your kids just have to work harder. And I think my pushback on that is always like, our kids are working hard. And I think that those kids are working hard too. Um, they just there's a different volume to it. Affluent communities have more kids working harder than non-affluent communities. They have kids working hard too. They're the amount of kids that are able to work hard, go to camps, play club sports, play year round. It's just a different volume of people. Um, in Olwein, if you want to play club sports outside of just our local like rec stuff, you have to drive 45 minutes to an hour. And those, and we have some that do, but they're typically affluent. They have the means to do so, and that's your only option. And if you don't do that, then you're left with just trying to figure it out here locally. And again, there's just not the amount of volume necessary to be able to pull that off versus playing a more affluent suburb of a metro area that does have higher volume of that level of support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And where you may have to travel 10 minutes to
Correct.
some of those different, club activities.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably a whole nother podcast topic, but really just partially the impact of all of the club sports and what that has done to high school or junior high school sports, right?
Yeah, it really is incredible, the amount of money that is spent in that environment. And I think even from like an economic development lens, I mean, if you're a young family and you're looking to move or relocate or to find a job and then buy a house and build a house, and you care about these things and you're paying attention to them, you're going to select a community where those things are accessible to your young family, and you don't blame them. And that I think is a challenge year over year, decade over decade. And like I said, when we talk about things are getting worse, not better, those are the decisions that are happening on an individual or micro basis that are having effects on the macro
Mm-hmm.
from that lens.
Yeah. So Josh, do you see what was done with football expanding to other sports?
Yeah, I do. It really is it is the quickest and easiest solution to at least throw something at the wall to say we see you and we want to find a solution to this problem because it is a problem. So, Lisa, there was a survey of Iowa high school leaders in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
The results of that survey were not widely published.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think part of it was it kind of the results kind of came in up against COVID. And so it kind of got lost in the shuffle of all that drama. But there was some very interesting outcomes of that. So that survey of Iowa high school athletic directors, principals, and superintendents across all nonprofit, or not, sorry, non-public and public schools had 571 participants, which is for the state of Iowa, any level of survey in any kind of shape or form, to have that level of income or of input is absolutely incredible. So in that survey, there was a question: do you believe that we have an equity issue in terms of classification?
Mm-hmm.
74.3% of the respondents said yes. So 0.75% of the respondents of 571 people that took it said yes, we have a problem. And another like 10% said maybe. So only 15% of the respondents said no, which is just mind-boggling. And then 69% of the respondents said that a change is necessary in classification to deal with the inequities that they see on the athletic field. Okay, now it was never published, but I happen to have access to the raw data. Shocking, probably. Um, but 49 non-publics took the survey or participated. Of those, 53% said that there was no issue with classification. Now, I have a lot of friends in the non-public environment. I collaborate with them. I have no issues. I don't think, I know there's a lot of consternation around the non-public versus the public and the recruiting, non-recruiting, and that there are some classification issues even within that environment that are maybe toxic to talk about. Um, but there are some good actors as well. And I don't know that we need to attack the non-publics in the state in terms of like you getting this and us getting this, or having separate competitive environments. I don't think that's good for anybody. But I do think some of the solutions that have been talked about, like the one with football or the opt-in system that I kind of mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
they basically allow for the non-publics to play on an equal playing field as well, and address the poverty issues there too. Because it's not impossible that a non-public wouldn't have or be able to get access to students of poverty, especially with the new ESAs. I mean, in the environment we're in, it's certainly plausible that we would see a higher percentage of poverty in a non-public than we did 10 years ago. So it's not unreasonable to think that that their mindset would be shifting from what it was 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember. In fact, I probably responded to that survey, I think, actually. So I had forgotten about that, Josh. Yeah, that was yeah, really interesting data. So, I think about, it happened in football a few years ago, but we haven't really seen a change in other sports. Um, are you aware, is there conversation that there will be change in some other sports coming in the next year or so?
Um, I have been hopeful, but I don't see or hear much chatter about it right now. I feel that we've had good conversations with our leaders. The boards of control of both of those groups are well aware of the problem or the issue. Um, I think a lot of folks were kind of in the wait and see. They saw the work that went into the football classification change, and I think that there was okay, let's give it 2 years to see what it does.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know from a statistical or analysis type environment that we've seen the data really shift all that much. Anecdotally, I can tell you that there were some schools, especially some of the big schools that maybe got to play down a class, seeing some success,
Mhm.
winning a couple of games. And I
Mhm.
think those anecdotal components are what this is all about, but it's hard to show that in a data set of 320 some odd schools and then say, look, here's 2 or 3 examples within that data set that this has really been successful with. But I bet if you talk to those kids in those programs, they would tell you that it made all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, Josh, what steps do you think either schools or communities, maybe even policymakers, you mentioned that earlier, could take to ensure that all student athletes have that equitable opportunities to succeed regardless of their socioeconomic status?
One step, talking locally, that, making sure this is an issue that your administrative team is aware of and is talked about. Um, our school district, I know many school districts across the state, so the school boards have talked about this. I have a sample resolution actually that if anybody wanted to have access to, I could send it and share it with them where a school board could review this and then basically make a statement that they would be in support of something like this, or change. Um, one of the biggest changes I think that we need to make is just representation of school districts that have high free reduced lunch populations.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna rattle some numbers off to you here real quick. And I'm sorry to kind of inundate you with some, the facts here. I know it's not super great to throw numbers around in a podcast, but bear with me. So, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, 41% of our students, or 41% is our average free reduced lunch population across the state. Okay. Girls Union Board of Control, their average free reduced lunch population by representation, 24%. The boys, 31%. The classification committee that is supposed to oversee this, 31%. All of our sports have individual rep councils,
Mhm.
32% across all of them. Our student advisory committee for both boys and girls, 26 and 32% respectively, in terms of representation. There is not a single committee across either the boys or girls union or group or decision-making group that has an average free and reduced lunch population as far as its representation in terms of equity. That's a problem. I asked myself, am I serving in those roles? I'm not, right? I'm not stepping up and saying I want to serve this because X, Y, or Z. Honestly, it's because we have so many issues at home that I need to deal with that I don't think I can commit time to that level, or that's necessarily important to my community that I'm serving, on a board of control for one of those things. And I think it's representative of the challenges that school districts of high poverty face, that their leadership is just dealing with other things and they can't commit time and energy to something like that. And so I think it's a kind of a two-headed dog in terms of, I don't think that these groups are intentionally saying we don't want high poverty schools involved in leadership. I think high poverty administration leadership is saying we're busy doing other things that we don't have time to commit to this type of work.
Mhm.
And that is kind of part of the problem too. I mean, I think that we need to, we do need to step up, and myself maybe included, in terms of being more involved in some of the leadership capacity here of what we can provide solutions to these problems.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. But I also appreciate your leadership, Josh. It's definitely seen as far as your knowledge, your willingness to even have this conversation today, and then, even at the state level. So, last question. What haven't I asked you that I should have asked you that you'd like to share on the podcast today?
Oh man, what haven't you asked me that I wanted you to ask me?
Yeah, related to our topic.
Um, I don't know. I think this has been a good conversation, and uh, I do want to reiterate, the last thing maybe is my students. When someone tells them to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, I think that we have students that want to participate that don't have boots. And I think just to take that analogy just to that next layer, like that, they maybe want to participate, but it's just a daunting task. Getting them out, getting them equipped, and then to put them on a court and to be competitive or to have a chance to enjoy the sport. Um, the reason that we need to impress upon our young athletes and even our spectators the value of sportsmanship is not because it's a moral obligation to be nice to your competitor. It's because without your competitor, there is no sport.
Hmm.
When Olwein left the NEIC, they went from 7 teams to 6, right? It's the analogy of taking our ball and going home. Well, we didn't take our ball and go home. We took our ball and went to a different court,
Hmm.
where we felt we could be more competitive. And that's the nature of sportsmanship. And so it does take everybody, even if the system currently works for you, it's not going to work for you forever if the teams on the bottom continue to go away. If the girls' sports or these other teams just continue to not be able to field teams, the sport goes away. And then that activity that we all think is valuable is no longer there. And I think that's the value of having these conversations and continuing to push for something to change when it comes to classifying our athletic programs.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today, Josh. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for devoting your time to learn about Iowa's classification system. Female leaders, we have something special for you, the Women in Educational Leadership Conference, coming up on Thursday, March 27th and Friday, March 28th. And men, feel free to join us as well. But we have two great speakers for the event. Dr. Kristen Anderson speaking about workplace well-being and cultivating conditions for women to thrive and not merely survive. And then Sarah Ciavari, she will be speaking about leading with resilience to bust burnout. You can go to our SAI website under events and find the Women in Educational Leadership Conference and hit that register now button. Look forward to seeing everyone.